G'day throttlers, welcome back to the channel. Today is my final review of the beautiful Harley-Davidson Lowrider S. Now I've had this bike from Harley Australia for the last 7 days, and due to Sydney weather I've been able to ride it in every weather condition except for snow and ice. It's been raining, it's been sunny, it's been cold, it's been dry, it's been wet, it's been absolutely everything, fog, but it's given me a good overview of this bike and its ability and its performance. So if you're new to the channel and you want to check out my previous videos on the Lowrider S, there was an initial thoughts video where I took it for a quick 30-minute ride on the day that I picked it up, and there was also a ride review that I did before I did any research on the specs of the bike. So it was an unbiased opinion of riding this without knowing any facts and figures, and that's in the description below if you'd like to check that out as well. But for now, the final review of the Lowrider S. Now let's talk about design to get started. There is no doubt that this design is based around the American West Coast club style of Harley. Any of you who have watched Sons of Anarchy, you'll see that most of the fleet, the motorcycle fleet in Sons of Anarchy, looked similar to this. Obviously they were all diners, they weren't Softails, but they did have this style of hot roddy, high bars, fists in the wind, low sleek tail end, lightweight flickable, Sons of Anarchy, West Coast style. So there's no doubt in my mind that this bike had the main inspiration coming from the West Side club scene with the small fairing as well. Now bringing this out in a Softail, now that the diners have gone, well, that divided opinion a lot. There's some diner tragics that say that the diner shouldn't have died, number one, and number two, this shouldn't have become a Softail. In my opinion, I think that it's very well suited to the Softail chassis. It's comfortable, it's super powerful, and it's agile as well. So I think that they've done a good job bringing it into the Softail range, but I know that even in the comments below in this video, you'll probably read a lot of people talking about that should have stayed as a diner and a collector's item in that category. But let's face it, motoring companies need to move into the future. They need to continue to attract new people into their brand. And this has been the challenge for Harley-Davidson for the last 5 to 10 years. And I think they're moving steadily and successfully into the future for the business side of things. So if this is a sign of things to come, I'm pretty excited by what Harley's got to offer. Alright, starting up here at the front end of the Lowrider S, you can see the dual 4-piston brakes on the front wheel. These obviously are better than a single front brake. However, I felt on this... G'day folks, Future Rob here. Now, I'm sitting here editing my final review video of the Lowrider S, and I've had, due to certain circumstances, I've had the Lowrider S for an extra week on top of what I already had it for. So it's been exciting for me, but it's also gotten me to a stage where I know the bike a whole lot more after having it for 2 weeks rather than 1. Now, I'm about to talk about how spongy the front brakes are on the Lowrider S. Since then I've discovered that they're not spongy at all, they're just a completely different feel to what I'm used to on my street glide. And if you ride this like you're relying on the ABS, if you grab a whole handful of front brake, you get amazing front brakes out of this twin disc setup on the Lowrider S. They're not spongy at all, they're just a very different feel, and a feel that I was not used to, but after spending more time on it, there is no problem with the front brakes at all. They are okay. Anyway, back to that final review video. Thanks for watching folks, and enjoy the rest of the video. Coming onto the front suspension, you can see it's an inverted fork. That reduces the unsprung mass of the bike, affects the centre of gravity, gives a bit of a better turning on the corners, and I really like the feel of the front suspension. I think that it's probably been a very smart decision to do on this bike, and I'm pretty sure it shares the same or a similar suspension inverted to the 107 Softail Sport Glide. Moving up to the top of the forks, you can see there's a small bikini fairing around the Halo Harley light. This does a surprising amount of wind deflection. Now, it doesn't make the wind disappear, of course, completely, but what it does, it seems to clean up the air as it passes over the front of the bike. So by the time it hits you around your chest and your head, it's really clean, free-flowing air. There's no buffeting at all. I was really quite surprised, because being a street glide owner with that big fairing, to have this small fairing make it such a comfortable ride, I really big thumbs up for this little bikini fairing. I only ever had it up to highway speed, no faster than that, and never in a real heavy windy day, but thumbs up for the bikini fairing. I think it did a really good job. The beating heart of this Lowrider S is the Milwaukee 8 114 cubic inch motor. Now, in metric terms, that's 1868 cc. This produces a whopping 155 newton meters of torque at 3000 revs. So what that means is, it doesn't matter what gear you're in, it doesn't matter what gradient you're on, this thing has power to pull you out of anything, to overtake cars, to rip up a hill, to accelerate out of a corner. So much power, so much torque to be able to give you everything you want in only a 308 kilo bike. Alright, coming up to the fuel tank, this is an 18.9 litre fuel tank. Obviously that's going to give you a few hundred kilometres with ease, but let's talk about these gauges up here, because that's something that I really am not quite so impressed by. Now, there's a lot of Harleys that are using tank gauges. It's nothing new. A lot of other brands of bike also use tank gauges. It's nothing new at all. But for me, having the gauges all the way down here on the tank, instead of up here just under your field of view, I find it's a little bit dangerous to have to bring your attention all the way down to the speedo and then all the way back up onto the road again. I know a lot of people are used to it, but more and more people are wearing full-face helmets when they ride Harleys, and so then your vision restriction ends about here. So for you to look down with a full-face helmet, you've got to actually move your head so far down that you've lost sight of the road ahead. So I believe that the days of gauges on the tank are probably a bit coming to an end. I could be wrong, and I know there's a bunch of you out there that love them. I think they look fantastic. I think they look traditional. However, I think that there's a perfect little space in here behind the bikini fairing where you could have fit a great little speedo. Even if it's a little digital one and still having this, I don't mind it, and you could probably do it as an aftermarket accessory. But for me personally, I struggled with the fact that these are on here. There's so many speed cameras and so many highway patrol out there these days that are giving motorcyclists a hard time. And I think that that's just one little thing that I didn't like about this bike. While we're here, I really love the handlebar position. Nice high mount to the triple tree. Just a basic bar here. I would imagine that a lot of people are either extending this mount here or putting higher bars on. But in general, I found this to be a nice set of bars. But let me show you the body positioning and show you how awkward I felt on this bike. Alright, so here we are sitting on the Lowrider S, and the peg position is mid-control pegs. Now, they've set these up purely and utterly so you can have more control, because this is a performance cruiser. So you can tuck up, keep your knees on the tank, have more control through the corners. Now, what I find awkward about this is, number one, I'm 5'10", so I'm not very tall, but I'm tall enough. But the moment I put my feet up on those pegs, my knees are very, very high, and my hip flexors are so tight and uncomfortable right from the time I get into this position. Now then combine it with the position of the handlebars, and I feel like, and I'm not sure if it shows up in the camera, but I feel like I'm leaning forward to ride this bike. I don't feel, I almost fell over. I don't feel like I'm in a very, very comfortable riding position for too long a period. Again, this is up to individual people to work out what they like. But I would suggest that if you're any taller than 5'10", which is me, 177 centimetres, if you're any taller than that, these mid controls are going to be no good for you at all. You'll have to look at putting forward controls on, and that'll change the dynamic of the bike and the performance of the bike because of what it was designed to do initially. So that's just one small complaint that I have about this bike. On my social medias, on Instagram and Facebook, there's been a lot of people asking me what I think about this because they feel that it's a bit awkward, and I agree. This body positioning, this seating position, the rider's triangle as they say, is a little bit awkward on this bike. I would say that most people, especially tall people, are going to have to make changes for it to suit them. Alright, now talking about the riding position and staying on the topic, let's talk about performance and cornering. So on paper, this bike has a 30.1 degree lean angle on both sides, which is pretty bloody good for a Harley-Davidson. The only thing is, the positioning of these mid-set pegs, they touch down really sooner than I thought they would from a practical riding point of view. Now that might have to do with the fact that it's a very agile bike and it's very flickable, so you can lean it into the corner quite aggressively, but it did touch down a little bit more than I expected and a little bit more than I wanted, to be honest. But it's not a deal breaker, of course. Some people love dragging pegs around corners. For me, I just don't like doing it. So there you go, lean angle 30.1 degrees. Now coming towards the back of the bike now, talking about the seat is incredibly comfortable and incredibly well supported. You can see there's a substantial bolster on the back of there. So for the high acceleration that this has, you're embedded pretty well in that seat. There's no fear of thinking you're going to slide backwards. I think that the riding triangle would make you more tired and uncomfortable over a long ride before you get uncomfortable by the seat. I think it's a really good choice of seat, quite comfortable. I did a few hundred kilometres in a day as probably my biggest ride, and I didn't have any problems with the seat comfortability at all. Coming down into being the soft tail chassis, you've got adjustable preload underneath the seat to depend on how you want the rear suspension set up, and you've got a single disc on the back, and obviously these beautiful bronze wheels on the front and the rear, which is almost like a signature of the Lowrider S. Now coming around to the rear of the bike, one of the final things to talk about is the most polarizing part of this bike from the general public. Now this is the tail light, nice LED tail light construction, vertical number plate bracket on top of the fender. Now a lot of people have a lot of hate for this rear end. They think that this is ugly, they think that this sitting up here is ugly as well. Me personally, I think it's quite period correct. Obviously this is designed after a hot rod style of bike, and probably from like the 80s perhaps, and this is just the style of lighting they had then. We've got modern technology in the rear, but it is bulky, and I understand that some people like that slick rear end. Personally I like it, I think it's a bit traditional. If anything, maybe a number plate relocation underneath, but I think it looks quite nice. If you don't like this and you still really want this bike, this is an easy change. You could get a relocation kit, you can put a slimline under fender light. There's so many options you can do. You can the world's your oyster. Third party market stuff, I'm sure even Harley-Davidson make a heap of stuff. Don't be put off by this, it's easily changed, but I quite like the look of it. So, my final thoughts about the Harley-Davidson Lowrider S are, I think it's a magnificent bike. I think that if you're after something high capacity, high powered, if you're after something that could potentially do distance as well as city stuff, if you're after something that's narrow enough to do lane filtering and living in the urban world, this is the bike for you. For me, it ticks all the boxes except for touring. It's a great bike. It's super powerful. It's super agile for a cruiser. It can become comfortable with a couple of changes, whether you looked at your foot positions or the handlebars, whatever it might be. You could put this bike into your perfect rider's triangle. Stock, for me, it wasn't ideal, but there would only be a couple of small changes that I'd need to make it ideal for my riding style. So who shouldn't buy this bike? Well, if you're a beginner to intermediate rider, this is something you'd have to be really wary of. There's a lot of horsepower in this chassis, easy to get yourself into trouble. But if you're intermediate to advanced and you've had a bigger bike experience already, rip into this bike. You'll absolutely love it. If I could, it would stay in the garage next to my Street Glide. This would be my city bike and the Street Glide would be my tourer. Unfortunately, it's not that perfect world. I have to take this back to Harley-Davidson now, but it is an absolutely fantastic bike. Yes, I would spend my money on it if I had it, and I would highly recommend it to everyone. Obviously, within the review, I talked about its faults, or its faults in my opinion, but amongst all of those faults, it is still an exceptional machine. Check it out. Thank you, Harley Australia, for letting me have this bike for the last 7 days. I've had a ball and I appreciate it, and I look forward to bringing you, my viewers, more content from Harley-Davidson Australia in the near future. If you enjoyed the video, folks, give us a thumbs up. If you are new to the channel, consider subscribing, tap that bell icon. Until the next video, folks, throttle on, stay safe, see you later.
Bird on a tree. I'm just